in smashing the lyric light at night, and through the streets like sportsters fight, and tearing all before us.
He said the star will drink the mill, and we will reckoning on the bill. No man for that shall go to jail, no carry anymore.
We'll break windows, we'll break doors, the watchdog down by 3 to 4s, then let the doctors work their cures and tinker up our rules.
George Armstrong Custer's early life was less than auspicious. Custer, born in New Rumley, Ohio, in late 1839, in a small town which today boasts only 1,738 people, earned a certificate for teaching grammar school in 1856, but he had much grander goals. The following year, he entered the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where he was less than stellar cadet. Custer graduated dead last in his class of 1861. When the Civil War broke out in April 1861, Custer joined the Union Army's cavalry and soon proved himself a competent, reliable soldier in battles such as the First Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Gettysburg. He was promoted several times, and by the time the war ended, he was a major general in charge of a cavalry division.
Well, here you have this 23-year-old former first lieutenant. He's only been a brigadier general since June 28th, and on July 3rd, he ignores orders from his corps commander to report to the left flank of the Union Army because he can see thousands of Confederate cavalry who are converging on the Union right. There's only an understrength division there under David Gregg, and with General Gregg's connivance, Custer's going to stay and help him hold back those Confederate troopers. In the fight at East Cavalry Battlefield, Custer and his brigade are going to hold the center of the Union line there. They're going to bear the brunt of the fighting. So whatever Jeb Stuart planned to do, and it looked like he was trying to get, as he reported, into the enemy rear at the same time that Pickett was attacking the center, Custer deserves a lot of the credit. He's not used to managing a brigade, but he exercises a personal brand of leadership that quickly wins the hearts of his Michigan troopers. When he sends the 7th Michigan Cavalry forward, he leads them himself. And in the climactic final charge, when there are 1,500 or more Confederate troopers coming down to try to pierce the Union center there, Custer will place himself in front of only 500 men from his 1st Michigan Cavalry. They're the only reserve the Union has. He will lead them forward in a charge. He will spur his horse at the last moment so every man behind him can see him, and then he raises his saber and yells, "Come on, you Wolverines!" Disappears among the rebels. His men, their blood goes up. In that instant, they give this tremendous shout and pour in after him, staggering the Confederate attack, holding it long enough so that other Union units can remount and hit the Confederates on their flanks and break that charge.
Custer was only 23 years old when he became a general in the Army. That was the youngest that any one had ever been promoted to that rank at his age. Throughout the war, Custer showed resilience time and again. He supposedly had 11 horses shot out from under him, yet he was wounded only once. His dogged pursuit of the Army of Northern Virginia is often partially credited for helping to end the Civil War. Custer captured more enemy soldiers, 7 of them, at one time. He captured more enemy soldiers than any other warrior of the Civil War. Custer was never afraid of getting his hands dirty. Unlike many other generals, he led his men from the front instead of from behind, and was often the first to plunge into battle. That's highly unlikely that anyone today would do that in the Army. In February 1864, Custer married Elizabeth Libby Bacon. In 1866, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel in charge of the 7th U.S. Cavalry Unit and went with Libby to Kansas to fight in the Plains Indian Wars. The Plains Indians showed tremendous fortitude. The Great Plains were the last Native American holdout. As settlers colonized the far west before the Civil War, few had put down roots in the plains due to the dry weather and large indigenous populations. But after the Civil War, the West land became scarcer, and the U.S. government granted 10% of Plains land to settlers and railroads. A confrontation between the Plains Indians against the settlers and government forces was inevitable. By the late 1860s, most Native Americans had been forced onto so-called Indian reservations or killed outright. Vowing to avoid the same fate, the Plains Indians settled in for a long and fierce holdout. In the hopes of squashing the livelihood of the Native American people on the plains, the government allowed the railroads to kill scores of buffalo herds to lay railroad tracks. They also urged hunters to kill as many buffalo as possible without oversight and encouraged trains to stop so passengers could massacre buffalo for sport. The more the white colonizers needlessly slaughtered buffalo, the angrier indigenous people grew. Some staged brutal attacks on settlers and railroad workers without regard to age or gender. To the tribes, the railroad represented an end to their livelihood, since for millennia they'd relied on free-roaming buffalo to survive. By the time Custer arrived on the scene in 1866, the war between the Army and the Plains Indians was in full force. In 1868, the U.S. government signed a treaty recognizing South Dakota's Black Hills as part of the Great Sioux Reservation. However, the government had a change of heart and decided to break the treaty in 1874 when Custer led an excursion of miners, gold miners, who had been looking for gold into the Black Hills. Custer was tasked with relocating all Native Americans in the area to reservations by January 31st, 1876. Any person who didn't comply would be considered hostile. The Native Americans, however, did not take the deception lying down. Those who could left their reservations and traveled to Montana to join forces with Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse at their fast-growing camp. Thousands strong, the group eventually settled on the banks of the Little Bighorn River. And to the Battle of Little Bighorn. The U.S. Army dispatched 3 columns of soldiers, including Custer and his 7th Cavalry, to round up indigenous people and return them to their reservations. The plan was for Custer's cavalry and Brigadier General Alfred Terry's infantry to rendezvous with troops under the command of Colonel John Gibbon and Brigadier General George Crook. They'd then find the Native Americans, surround them, and force their surrender. That was the plan. Crook was delayed. He had an encounter with Crazy Horse down south, but Terry, Custer, and Gibbon met up in mid-June, and after a scouting party found a trail headed toward Little Bighorn Valley, they decided Custer should move in, surround the tribes, and await reinforcements. Custer forged ahead, but things didn't go as planned. Around midday on June 26th, his scouts located Sitting Bull's camp. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, however, Custer planned a surprise attack for the next day. He moved it up when he thought the Native American forces had discovered his position. Custer divided his more than 600 men into 4 groups. He ordered one small battalion to stay with the supply train, and the other 2, led by Captain Frederick Benteen and Major Marcus Reno, to attack from the south and prevent the tribesmen from escaping. Custer would lead the final group, 210 men strong, and planned to attack from the north. Reno's group attacked first, but swiftly embarked on a disorganized retreat after realizing they were completely outnumbered. By the time they regrouped, at least 30 troops were dead. Benteen's troops came to Reno's aid, and the combined battalions joined forces in what is now known as Reno Hill. They remained there despite Custer's order. Between, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs, P.S., bring packs. As you can see on the model that I built, I have located the areas where Custer attacked. As a matter of fact, when he got down to the river, Little Bighorn River, very thin river, he said, my God, this isn't the end of the village, this is the middle of the village, because he didn't know that Crazy Horse had come to the village and camped adjacent to Sitting Bull to the north. I also have shown where Reno retreated to behind the rocks, and Benteen where he was ordered to go to first, and then he came back to Benteen's or to Reno's help. The small white dots that you see perforating the model represent teepees. The sketch shown here is a sketch of George Armstrong Custer, the Indian fighter. He dressed very fancy in the Civil War with plumes of feathers on his hat and gold braids and all kinds of things. But in the Indian Wars, he fought more like the Indians. He would sneak around and attack only when it was the right time to attack, except for the last attack, the Battle of Little Bighorn.
It's one of the most crushing defeats in American history. Custer's last stand. June 25th, 1876. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and over 600 troopers of the 7th United States Cavalry arrive in the Little Bighorn Valley of southern Montana. The cavalry has come to subdue a village of defiant Indians. Thousands of Sioux and Cheyenne under the leadership of the great holy man, Sitting Bull. For a century, the United States has pushed the frontier west, herding tribe after tribe onto agencies or reservations. The Sioux and the Cheyenne don't want to give up their land on the northern plains. These last defiant Indians gather into a colossal wandering village. In the spring of 1876, the village arrives on the plains of Montana.
The village was always on the move. They knew the Army was out after them. And to the United States Army, to capture a fleeing village was an impossible task.
Custer follows Sitting Bull's path west across the Wolf Mountains. On the other side, the Indian village stands on the banks of a slender river. The Indians call it the Greasy Grass. The Army calls it the Little Bighorn. On the morning of June 25th, Custer and his troops arrive in a treacherous landscape carved up into hidden channels and ravines. Perfect cover for fighters who know its contours. Deadly for the soldiers who don't. Around noon, Custer makes what many believe is his fatal mistake. He divides his forces into 3 separate columns. Custer heads up the bluffs along the river to attack from the north. It's his first clear look at the size of the village. He realizes he doesn't have enough troops to do the job. He sends a rider south with a note calling for more men and more ammo.
It's important to keep in mind that no one had any idea of how many Indians there would be. They simply had no idea.
Indians are surrounding Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his battalion. Survivors are struggling to join up with other troopers on nearby high ground. A spot now called Last Stand Hill.
The tables are turning for Custer. He's no longer the attacker, he's being attacked. Decides to take this high hill, which we call Last Stand Hill today. All the soldiers killed their horses to hide behind. A lot of the warriors said was they got close to this hill, they arched their arrows high into the sky, having those arrows come down behind those dead horses. They said, we rained arrows down on those men. Their shots quit coming, and we rushed up and we killed them all.
Lieutenant Colonel George Custer and over 200 of his men annihilated in a defeat that devastated America in 1876.
This battle, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, was the Plains Indians' greatest victory. This caused the government to send out more forces, more military.
Less than a year after the battle, Sitting Bull flees to Canada and Crazy Horse surrenders in Nebraska. The Last Stand has been studied more closely than almost any military engagement in our history. Today, the battlefield still lies serene and empty above the cottonwood trees lining the Little Bighorn River.
Custer's last stand becomes a slaughter. The exact events of Custer's last stand are unclear. What is known is that either Benteen or Reno helped Custer despite admitting later they heard heavy gunfire coming from Custer's position. Custer and his men were left to face hundreds of Native American warriors alone. Some historians believe many of Custer's men panicked, dismounted from their horses, and were shot dead as they fled. No one knows when Custer realized he was in trouble, since no eyewitnesses from his troops lived to tell the tale. All that is known is what John Martin, the bugler, said before he took the message back for reinforcements. He said that Custer had said, that this is not the end of the village, this is the middle of the village. He realized the village was twice as big as he thought it was. That's the Indian village. The Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, led by Crazy Horse, attacked with Winchester, Henry, and Spencer repeating rifles, as well as bows and arrows. Most of Custer's men were armed with Springfield single-shot carbine rifles and Colt .45 revolvers. They were easily outgunned. Custer's line and command structure quickly collapsed, and soon it was every man for himself. Custer dies by 2 bullet wounds. In the end, Custer found himself on the defensive with nowhere to hide and nowhere to run, and was killed along with every man in his battalion. His body was found near Custer Hill, also known as Last Stand Hill, alongside the bodies of 40 of his men, including his brother, actually 2 brothers, and a nephew, a brother-in-law, and horses. Custer had suffered 2 bullet wounds, one near his heart and one in the head. It's unclear which wound killed him, or if the head wound happened before or after he died. In the heat of battle, it is unlikely the warrior who shot Custer knew he just killed a U.S. Army icon. Even so, once word spread that Custer was dead, many Native Americans claimed to be his executioner. After the battle, Native American warriors stripped, scalped, and dismembered their enemies' corpses on the battlefield, possibly because they believed the souls of disfigured bodies were doomed to walk the earth forever. It has also been reported that the women who would go around and help dismember the bodies, when they came to Custer, they only stuck an awl in his ears to pierce his ears, and the reasoning was that they said Custer needs to be able to hear better. Reaction to the Little Bighorn spells doom for the Plains Indians. The Battle of the Little Bighorn didn't end with the massacre of Custer and his men. The Native Americans quickly regrouped and pursued Reno's and Benteen's battalions. The troops fought until General Terry's reinforcements finally arrived. Now it was the Native Americans who were outnumbered, so they packed up camp and fled, bringing the largest defeat of the U.S. Army during the Plains Indian Wars to an end. The Sioux and Cheyenne reveled in their victory for a time, but their celebration was short-lived, as was their freedom. When word of Custer's death reached Americans celebrating their nation's ceremonial on 4th of July, they demanded retribution. The U.S. Army intensified its efforts to count down all resisting Native Americans and either wipe them out or force them back onto reservations. Within a year, most had been rounded up or killed. In May 1877, Crazy Horse surrendered at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, where he was later bayoneted and killed after an altercation with an Army officer. After fleeing to Canada, Sitting Bull eventually surrendered in 1881 and lived on the Standing Rock Reservation until he was killed by Native American agent policemen during a conflict at his house in 1890. One of the main reasons that Custer went into Little Bighorn prematurely and did not wait for the reinforcements was simply because of the national newspapers, such as the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune, they were poking fun at Custer. They were more or less calling him a chicken shit, that he'd been a valiant warrior during the Civil War, but he hadn't done much in the Indian War, even though he'd been out there on the plains all that time. He'd really only gotten into a couple of battles. One was Washita, and one was the Little Bighorn. So they were saying that he didn't have it anymore. He didn't have it what it takes. And that got to Custer. So he was going to show them he was going to go in there without the reinforcements and finish off those Indians. But it did not work. The single worst defeat for the United States military in one battle is often considered to be the Battle of Little Bighorn. In this battle, a combined force of Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors decisively defeated the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army, who, of course, as you know, was led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The reason he was a lieutenant colonel and it had been a general before was he was stripped of his ranks when he got a couple of court-martials. One court-martial was for not breaking up a fight that he witnessed, and the other one was because he had left his post to go back to the fort to be with Libby, who came out to visit him. Custer's forces were outnumbered and overwhelmed, resulting in the deaths of Custer and most of his command, around 260 soldiers. 210 in his unit, his battalion, and 50 more spread out among Reno and Benteen's men. This battle is significant not only for the scale of the defeat, but also for its impact on U.S. policy towards Native American tribes and the subsequent military actions in the Great Plains. The loss was a blow to U.S. military prestige and highlighted the challenges faced by the Army in dealing with Native American resistance to westward expansion.
Rock-a-bye baby in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all.
Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, you come a waltzing Matilda with me. We sang as they stopped at Chumbuck in the sucker bag. You come a waltzing Matilda with me.
How can you do this to me? I paid all the bills, I cared for you, and then I can't believe you. You actually done this to me. How can you do this to me? I can't believe you. How can you?
Why are you yelling?
I'm playing Barbies.
That still doesn't explain why are you yelling.
Barbie just had a baby.
That still doesn't explain why you're yelling.
Barbie's white.
Okay, and?
Ken's white.
So?
The baby's black.
Oh shit.
That's what I said.
Fucking Barbie.
It's just right and tearing all before us.
He said a star will drink down hill and pay the reckoning on the bill. No man for that shall go to jail from Gary in glory.
We'll break windows, we'll break doors, the watch knocked down by 3s and 4s. Then let the doctors work the cures and tinker up our bruises.
He said a star will drink down hill and pay the reckoning on the bill. No man for that shall go to jail from Gary in glory.
We'll make the mayors and sheriffs run. We are the boys no man tears done if he regards a whole skin.
Instead of small drink down there and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for that shall go to jail. From Gary Owen in glory, our hearts so stout have got us fame. For soon 'tis known from whence we came. Where'er we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of small drink down there and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for that shall go to jail. From